You may know the classic story, I think it's told by Basho, of two monks who are sort of meeting in the woods. And one monk is really upset and crying. And his friend says, what's going on? And he said, last night I had a dream that I was a butterfly. And then he wept a little more. And his friend said, well, that sounds like a beautiful dream. What's wrong with that? And with tears in his eyes, his friend said, but what if I'm actually a butterfly dreaming I'm a man? It's a curious story because what we're doing in our practice is training ourselves to disengage from habitual thoughts and habitual beliefs. We are practicing what it means to see clearly, to see what's true rather than our story, our embellishment, our hope for how we'd like it to be. So every time we wake up and lost in a thought form and we come back to the breath or the sounds or the experience of here and now, that moment of waking up is a powerful moment. Most of our lives are all about reacting to what happens. And I would imagine you have had moments of deep contentment in your life where you have wanted nothing different than what's here. Nothing to take away, nothing to add. And those are exquisite moments. We know what that feels like. And we also know how the mind gets carried away by these incredible winds. Sometimes they're described as energies that just sort of take over. I've certainly talked about them before, but what I'd like to do tonight is to sort of review them and like to share just a couple stories and some of the classic pointing out instructions for when you get taken away by one of these 5 states. So I'm going to talk a little bit about greed, desire, wanting, about aversion, ill will, hatred, about the state of worry and anxiety and restlessness, about sloth and torpor, and the state of doubt and self-criticism. These states were sort of codified 2,500 years ago in the Buddhist tradition. These 5 states that when they take over, it is impossible to be present. And yet, once you become aware of them, some pretty amazing things can happen. So, aversion, anger, judgment, blame, ill will. I was just reflecting on this, and I happened to run across an article that said that last June, 13,000 couples got married. And the odds aren't great that those 13,000 couples are going to stay together. The statistics are pretty grueling. So we're called, we're attracted, we're called to connection. And as Harville Hendricks likes to say, that romantic love is the anesthesia that brings two incompatible people together. For the purpose of healing. You got to remember that tagline. That's important. So there's been a lot of research done on what are the secrets of retaining intimacy in a relationship. It's an interesting article, and I'll include the link in the email. The number one experience or emotion that spells doom for your relationship is contempt. That when you feel or you express contempt, that's an incredibly destructive force. So aversion is pretty intense stuff, and they actually break it down to active destruction and passive destruction. So if you're with your partner, you say like, wow, I have this really cool idea I want to do. Active destruction would be saying something like, oh, is this another one of your half-baked ideas? And passive destruction would be, oh, that's interesting, while you're texting or doing an email. And what the antidote to that actually is kindness. The antidote is either passive construction or active construction, which is either that's great or, well, tell me more. How do you think you're going to do that? How can I help you make that happen? It's very interesting. They talked in this article about how, and they actually gave the example of someone saying, oh, look at the bird out in the yard. And really what that person is saying is, join me in this experience. And when there is aversion and we turn away, that is a very powerful force. So we've all had that experience of either feeling ignored or feeling turned away from at some point. And the antidote to aversion, when you find yourself in a state of ill will, judgment, blame, contempt, the miracle of awareness is seeing it. Just seeing it, being able to name it, is the major antidote. As soon as you recognize it, things begin to shift. It allows you to move from feeling like being aversive to being with your aversion. And the antidote is compassion and kindness. Actively turning your attention toward kindness. There's a danger with aversion because anger is a pretty strong energy. To sort of move into, what's called premature transcendence or spiritual bypassing. Oh, it's just anger, it's just fine. I'll just hold it with a little bit of compassion, it'll go away and never come back again. And of course that doesn't work. Those energies are very, very powerful, and they actually call for deeper investigation. Inevitably, anger is an unmet need. When you look under the anger to the experience, there's generally something you're needing or wanting that's not happening. And as you turn your attention to that, to investigate what it feels like, what you're believing, what you're wanting, there can be some very powerful insights as to what's going on under the aversion. And aversion can run from mild annoyance to the strong, blind rage. And of course, the smallest things can trigger us. There's a story of someone on one of our week-long retreats got into a little battle over space with the person sitting next to him. It was because you're sitting pretty tight. And they were just talking about inches, but he spent the whole retreat just enraged. He came back and he saw that this guy had moved his zabuton like 3 inches toward his. And he said he went into this murderous rage. it became a real opportunity to practice, to recognize it, see it, really, really look at it. So these states can be seen as weather systems. They come and they go. And aversion, anger, ill will, annoyance, when we can see them as weather systems, trusting that they're going to change, that can sometimes open up a little bit of space to look deeper into them. The second weather system is about craving, about wanting. And this has to do with sense desire, with fantasy, with planning. When the mind gets hijacked and gets lost in any of those areas, we can get lost for a lifetime in wanting and daydreaming and planning. I once had a powerful experience with this when I moved into an ashram when I was 25. And in order to be in the ashram, you had to take a vow of celibacy. So I had a celibacy vow for about 7 years in my 20s and into my 30s, which you might imagine was at times excruciating. Basically being in a community of other people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, all, doing yoga and exercising and working hard. And basically we worked hard and we exercised. That was a big part of our strategy. But inevitably I got infatuated with someone, And every time I would meditate and close my eyes, there'd just be this person who I had turned into someone really, really special. I tried everything working with it, to try and move it away, to try to ignore it, etc., and then get lost into fantasy because my mind tends to go that way. I actually found myself so distraught by being lost in craving and sense pleasure that I actually started, I'm not someone who is sort of like prays or is very devotional, but it was so hard to deal with this that I actually found myself just praying for something to help me see through this, because it was painful. The desire and the yearning was so painful. And I had this amazing meditation where I was just I was meditating and she was sitting across from me, and then she started smiling. And then her smile kept going. And then her face turned into a skull. And then she was just a skeleton. That kind of stopped it. That kind of cured me. And actually, there's a very, very powerful teaching in that. In the Buddhist tradition, there are specific meditations on the decaying body, the stages of a decaying body. There are meditations on the orifices, And in some ways they're sort of designed to sort of turn your attention toward aversion to the body. That's one way. But the real teaching is seeing impermanence, remembering impermanence. It's an incredibly powerful remembering when you find yourself lost and wanting, is to recognize everything born out of causes and conditions is subject to fall away, subject to change. I led an intensive this last weekend up at Kripalu Center in Western Massachusetts. It's a wonderful place to go if you haven't been for a retreat. And one of the experiences I was leading didn't really go the way I wanted it to. The music was wrong and it went okay, but I found myself just sort of chewing on it. Well, why didn't it work this way, et cetera, et cetera. And then I remembered a line from a poet, and I cannot remember his name, But there's one line where he said, it's important sometimes to take the 3,000-year view. And so I did that with this one little thing, put 3,000 years around it. It's not such a big thing anymore. And again, when you find your mind lost in planning, lost in fantasy, lost in sense desire, it's helpful to remember this is the nature of your mind. You are not unique. You know, as Werner Erhard said, 5 billion people thinking they're unique is not unique. But when you can investigate what's underneath the wanting, you know, what's underneath the desire, what's underneath the craving. For me, there is something about recognizing that fantasy and planning is a way of self-soothing. And it's a way of disengaging from what's happening right now. So the antidote, again, is just to see it. Once you name it, you've begun to disengage. But then to look underneath, what is the feeling? What is the emotion there? To reflect on impermanence, that everything is destined to change and fall away can be helpful. And the other antidote is to reflect on gratitude, to reflect on what you have. And what that can do is it can bring back a sense of contentment. It can guide your attention back to a sense of fullness rather than the mind seeking something better out there that's going to make you happy. When you can fill your heart and mind with gratitude, you shift your state in a very, very powerful way. And one of my teachers would say that grace is only received in the cup of gratitude. It's only when you can invoke a deep, deep sense of gratitude that grace can flow in your life, that you can truly receive. So aversion is a pushing away. Craving is a pulling toward. You know, two competing energies. And of course, so much of our life is designed to avoid and to seek. Avoid pain, seek pleasure. And that cycle keeps us going. So the third weather system is in the category of worry and anxiety and restlessness. The inability to really be still and collect the mind. A friend of mine from the ashram got very into Theravadan practices and went to Burma and shaved his head and took robes and really put himself deeply into the practice. He was telling me how he did a 3-month retreat. And the entire time, his mind was like a squirrel on caffeine. You know, just impossible to tame. And he wrestled with it and did a lot of self-rejecting, you know, like I came all the way here, I shaved my head, I gave everything away, and I'm just sitting here and my mind is just shameless. And he went to see one of his teachers, and he had a translator for the teacher, and he kind of described, you know, the restlessness and worry and anxiety, you know, and the monk said something, and then it was translated to him, and the translator said, he says that he fully understands that he spent 6 months restless on a retreat. And he said there was something about getting that his teacher also wrestled with the same thing, and that it was okay. He said, like that, everything was okay. and he began to feel more settled. And it's interesting when we recognize anxiety, restlessness, if you can allow and make room for it and then turn to investigate it, to really be intimate with it. What is underneath that? Generally, there's a lot going on. There's a sense that there's something out there that's going to fix you. Restlessness and worry can be a really powerful messenger. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. As one of my teachers said, if you haven't paid your taxes in 10 years, and your mind is worried about it, it's kind of worried for a good reason, Sometimes, worry is just the mind looking out for you. We are designed to scan for danger. So on one hand, anxiety, worry, restlessness is an ally. It wants you to be safe. But at the same time, we can find ourselves utterly lost in it. I'd mentioned before there's one particular system of self-discovery that says that every fear, every anxiety you have can be distilled down to three basic things. It's either tied into a sense of survival, where your survival is threatened, or it's tied into a sense of losing control, or it's tied into a fear of losing attention, affection, and love. And it can be helpful as you reflect on chronic anxiety, chronic worry. Does it match any one of these? Is it related to a sense of survival? Is it related to what it's like to lose control? Or is it related to losing attention, affection, and love? Looking deeper can be very powerful. Mary Oliver says this in a poem called I Worried. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up, and took my old body and went out into the morning and sang. Worry and anxiety and restlessness are a powerful, powerful force. And when we're lost in it, it is impossible to be present. And again, recognizing it, recognizing the state is the key. Once you see it, you can then begin to explore it and investigate it. And of course, there are some very powerful forces that manipulate anxiety and worry to facilitate change. We certainly see that in our culture. And for me, there's a recognition about what I have control over and what I don't have control over that I found very, very helpful for myself. To really examine what I do have control over and take responsibility for that. And to clearly delineate what I do not have control over has been very helpful for me. Anxiety and worry is where my mind is habitually trained to go. Returning again to the present moment, from the externals to the here and now. Again, reflecting on gratitude is a very powerful way of calling yourself back. So restlessness and agitation, powerful weather system that gets in the way of being present. The opposite is called sloth and torpor, of sleepiness, heaviness. Anyone fall asleep during the meditation? Yeah, I saw a few folks. So I was once leading a meditation retreat, and I believe I've shared this story before, and the person I was leading with was leading the morning meditation. And she had a boom mic that was in front of her. And so she gave the instructions. I think it was like 6 in the morning and everyone's meditating. And suddenly there was this. And like everyone jumped and I looked over, and what happened was the mic was here and she went like this. And she tried to make it look like a spiritual experience, like she just felt this, surge of Shakti, divine energy filling her. It didn't work, but profound embarrassment, but a great teaching moment. When you experience that heaviness, the density, in meditation or just in life, what I've seen just in interacting with lots of people is really getting that we are indeed a depleted, overstimulated culture. And that when you're operating without the rest that your body needs, as I've said before, and you close your eyes in meditation with the intention to find inner balance, your body will first go like, oh, you're really listening to me? Okay, well, let me tell you what I really need. And boom, you're out. So when you investigate sloth and torpor, the heaviness, the density, quite often it's biological. When I was flying back yesterday on a very small plane, and the seats are just horrible on those planes. And I actually, I woke up and my head was back and my mouth was wide open. One of those like, oh boy. That was purely biological because I was pretty tired. But that can be just an organic signal. Your body's giving you a message. You are depleted. As I often like to say on retreats, if you slept the whole retreat, it would transform your life. There's a maxim in yoga that says the more dynamic your rest, the more dynamic your activity. So meditation on one level serves in a very powerful way just to disengage. And for folks who are really depleted, I oftentimes recommend setting time aside every day to lie down and do a body scan meditation. And what happens over time, if you're really depleted, you'll fall asleep every time, but it'll be a very high quality sleep. And over time, you will actually find yourself being a little bit more awake and being able to lie down and actually do the meditation where you scan through the body. And over time, you may feel a little bit of aliveness and a desire to sit up. But if you do find yourself like chronically tired, take rest as a discipline. It will be amazing. It'll be very powerful, I guarantee you. Just take 3 weeks, 20 minutes to consciously lie down, breathe, do a body scan. Your system will begin to reset itself in a powerful way. So biological is an important thing, and that has certain needs. But sometimes sloth, torpor, heaviness, density has an emotional quality to it as well. It becomes a way to disengage. Becomes a way to sort of get lost in sort of a sinking mind. And oftentimes what that might require to rebalance might be a little bit of stimulation. In meditation practice itself, the general teaching instructions are, if you're finding yourself in that, in that in-between zone, you want to bring in a little more energy. So if you're focusing on your breath, turn your attention to the sounds, a little bit more stimulating externally, or open your eyes, or stand up. In that same way with sloth and torpor, when you experience depression, one of the most powerful things you can do is exercise. There's so much research done now, to the point where quite a few psychologists really will not work with someone unless they're on a pretty rigid exercise program, because of the stimulation brings you back into balance. It's finding that balance between being overstimulated and restless, or being understimulated and sort of lost in sloth and torpor. Finding that midway can be very, very helpful. So the next weather system in many ways can be the most crippling of all. And it's about doubt and self-criticism. Can be quite paralyzing. So in 10 days, I'm going to be doing a pilot for a TV show called One With Everything TV. And a friend of mine who I've known from my ashram days is the music director of the Apollo Theater in New York, Matt Ostreicher. He's an amazing musician. He's traveled with, a lot of well-known people. He's, performed on TV. He's an amazing, amazing guy. But he's always had this vision for like a late-night spiritual talk show. And he's always said, I want you to do it. I want you to be the host. And I've always said, look at me, I have a face made for radio, I'm not sure you want a 6'5", skinny, balding, middle-aged white guy being the host of this show. But he said, no, you've got the energy that I really, really want to have on the show. And I kept resisting, and then I said, look, okay, life is about saying yes. I'll help you we'll do the pilot, and we'll see what happens. So we're shooting the pilot in 10 days. So doubt and self-criticism is a big part of my experience right now. Actually, not so much. We went up to do blocking and staging it, and it's at a theater up in Connecticut. And so I took the train up, and I thought, what the heck have I gotten myself into, So I walked into the theater, and there's a house band, these amazing musicians, world-class musicians, and there's the stage, and, he asked me to write a little monologue, nothing that we would, we'll work on it. And so I just sort of walked in. They said, okay, we're just going to block it out, and then, the announcer, who's the lead musician, they have graphics, and this band is playing, and they've got all the bumpers worked out, the songs for when guests come and go, and I just got off the train, and then there's this guy saying, live from the Bijou Theater is One With Everything TV, and you're our guest, and now your host, Jonathan Foust. And I walked out and did a little monologue, and we did interviews, and I had a blast. It was actually really, really fun. And part of it was, a number of years ago, I just decided I'm going to be me until I'm fired. So we'll see how it goes. But we've got a killer band. That's good, that's good. And I don't know if you know Krishna Das, the musician. He's going to be our musical guest. And he's great. So we go way back. And we're going to have an interview with a scientist, a social activist, a spiritual teacher, and a musician. And the idea is there'll be a little bit more in-depth interviews. You know, we kind of want to slow things down, but not slow things down so much that people are going to change the channel. You know, that's the inquiry. Can we get away with that? But we also have someone, oh my God, his name is slipping right out of my mind. I'm so sorry, but he's an African-American man who's a musician in the South. He's in his 70s. And and there were some KKK guys who had come in to hear the band. And he decided he was going to befriend these guys. And he did. He became friends with them. They had conversations, and he very powerfully shifted some very deep beliefs in some of these people. He wrote a book, and NPR did a whole piece, which I actually happened to hear. So he'll be on the show. I'm looking forward to meeting him. So doubt is a very interesting thing to play with. The thoughts that are usually associated with doubt are, can I do this? You know, is what I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Anyone ever have that thought? Yeah. When we are in doubt, it's like being in a desert without any landmarks. And when you reflect on doubt, oftentimes there are numerous voices going on. As someone said, we're run by committee, you know? So different voices have the microphone, and there's so many we just kind of get paralyzed. Part of doubt is also the ruthless critic. That voice in the back of your head, or in the front of your head, or center of your head, wherever it is, that's just right there, commenting and criticizing. The antidote to doubt and criticism, again, is to recognize it. As soon as you can name it, you've begun to shift your relationship to it. The other antidote is to have a clear intellectual understanding of the map. It's when you recognize that doubt is one of the weather systems, and that when you practice mindfulness, when you have an intention to become more awake, doubt is part of it. Doubt comes forward as part of the practice. You begin to recognize patterns. You begin to recognize the forces that unconsciously drive you. You begin to see them, and you didn't see them before. You were just reacting to them. That's kind of the good news. So an intellectual understanding, very, very helpful. Particularly when you're practicing meditation. Whatever arises is exactly what you can be with. The second antidote, and this is the tricky one, is cultivating some form of faith, some quality of how you hold your experience. The third Zen patriarch called it cultivating the faith mind, which is a sense of how you hold it. For some people, that is a tradition. For some people, it's a teacher or a path. For others, it's nature. For others, it's just the mystery. What is it when you let go of something? What are you letting go into? Having that sense of faith or understanding can be enormously helpful. And again, doubt and self-criticism can be allies. They're there to make sure you don't overreach. But at the same time, when they are too empowered, we feel deeply, deeply limited. So as I like to say, there's good news and bad news. The good news is there are only 5 states. And the bad news is that they're really, really pervasive. But at the same time, I find this awareness of these 5 states to be incredibly empowering. As you practice self-observation without judgment, you will begin to see more and more clearly these states when they arise. The practice of naming can be very powerful. Oh, aversion. Oh, fantasy. Oh, worry. Recognizing the state, first thing. Sensing if you can allow, if you can make room for it, if you can say yes to it. Sometimes you can't, but when you can, what that does is it actually creates more space for it. You become larger than it when you can say, okay, here I am once again lost in planning. All right, let's take a look at this. Let me have tea with this. Then you can actually investigate and be intimate with it. So what's going on? What does it feel like when I'm lost in planning and wanting? What am I needing that's not being fulfilled? What am I believing about this? Is that belief true? The opportunity when you're lost and you wake up is to come back to the practice of clear seeing. To really, really sense, so what is this? What does this have to teach me? And to remember that you are the awareness, and these are the weather systems moving through. Let's close with a short meditation. You might turn your attention to the breath. And I'd like to lead just a little reflection on the perception of space. Can you imagine or feel the space inside your thumbs? Can you feel or imagine the space between your thumbs and your forefingers? Can you imagine the space inside your palms and your fingers? And can you feel or imagine the space inside your lungs as you breathe? And can you feel or imagine the space outside your body? Can you imagine this perception of space as effortless? is it possible to imagine the space inside your body and the space outside your body as one continuous space? Can you imagine thoughts, feelings, sensations arising and falling away inside this space? And can you imagine the weather systems of aversion, of wanting, of worry, of sloth and torpor, of doubt and fear, as impermanent weather systems moving in space? You might take a moment to reflect on the realm of compassion, reflecting on your desire to be happy, to be at peace, to feel safe, and to feel free. You might take a moment to bring into mind either one person or a few people, and in your own way, wish them well. Wish them happiness, safety, and freedom. And imagine that spreading out through this infinite space to all beings. Including this body, this breath. And then very gently deepening your breath. And letting your eyes open when you're ready.